Will Oklahoma's typically prolific offense take a hit with a defensive-minded head coach? We got Parker Thune on the line from 247 Sports to help us break down the Oklahoma offense as we head toward spring practice. Parker, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Mark. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here. We'd like to get everybody set up for the Sooners in the spring and take the offense and break it down position by position. But with the new offensive coordinator, let's start there. Jeff Levy comes in after 2 years at UCF, followed by 2 years at Ole Miss, two of the better offenses in the country. Those figures could also be tied, of course, to the personnel on the field, but also the head coaches. Your thoughts about the Levy hire and maybe some differences he may bring to the table?
Yeah, I think it's a great hire, and I think the concern in a lot of folks' minds with regard to Jeff Levy being the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma is it feels almost like a stopgap because Levy is regarded as one of those guys that's going to be a head coach before long. And so I think the prevailing worry is that he's only back at Oklahoma for a year or two, maybe three. I'm not sure I buy that. Levy's an OU alum. It's where he started his career. He was recruited by Oklahoma as an offensive lineman, never played because of an injury, but went immediately into coaching, spent 5 years on staff as a student assistant, and that's what kickstarted his career in the coaching profession. So this is a homecoming for him, and it's a job that he's really, really excited to embrace and a challenge that he's excited to take on. So I don't know how long Jeff Levy is Oklahoma's offensive coordinator, but I think he's about as good a hire as Brent Venables could have made. It's an exciting hire. He's already proven his acumen as a recruiter, being able to go out and secure Nick Evers at quarterback in the class of 2022 and Jackson Arnold in the class of 2023. As far as what Sooner fans can expect from their offense, as far as what's going to be different 1 year to the next, I think the biggest thing is that Levy's offense will be a bit more pass heavy than Lincoln Riley's offense was. A lot of people don't realize Lincoln Riley's offenses historically over the 5 seasons he was head coach in Norman and the 2 seasons he was offensive coordinator, they actually leaned toward the run on a 55-45 split. Lincoln Riley ran the ball more often than he threw it. I think with Jeff Levy, what you'll see is the Sooners will end up throwing the ball more than they run it. And that's not to say that the importance of the running back in the offense is diminished at all, and that's not to say the statistics will be any less impressive, but I do think you'll see an increased reliance on the pass. You'll see Dillon Gabriel put the ball in the air a lot in 2022, and I think you'll also see a lot more formational shifting sands with Jeff Levy. He's a guy that likes to get creative in how he lines up his skill position players to try and create mismatches. So he's going to mix and match. He's going to give you some looks that maybe you haven't seen before on tape. And that's what's most exciting about a Levy offense and what's going to be exciting about this Oklahoma offense under his direction is that he's going to be able to throw a wrench in your defensive game plan whenever he feels like it.
And at the level of program where Oklahoma sits, it is not uncommon to have a coordinator who is on that fast track. So to have him for 3 seasons may seem short to some, but at the same time, that would not be certainly uncommon in his position and in Oklahoma's position. We got Parker Thune on the line from 247 Sports. You can also catch him on his shows, Sports Talk 1400, 947. I'm sorry. Yeah, 947, The Ref. Let people know where they can find you before we continue here, Parker.
Yeah, of course. So you said it. OUinsider.com is the Oklahoma homepage on the 247 Sports Network. Brandon Drum, Joey Helmer, and I cover all things OU football and recruiting on a daily basis over there. So membership over there is $9.99 a month. If you sign up today, you can get $1 for your first month, but that's the place to be, especially if you really, really like to dig in on the Sooners recruiting efforts and what the future could look like for Oklahoma. And then I'm on air 12 to 3 on Sports Talk 1400 AM in Norman, which is also available all across the state of Oklahoma, across our network, the Ref Sports Radio Network. The biggest signal therein is 94.7 FM, the Ref in Oklahoma City. So 12 to 3 every weekday. You can be heard listening to me blab on about any and all things Oklahoma and college sports, professional sports, whatever we happen to be talking about that day.
Awesome. Well, we are happy to have you for a slice right here. Let's move on to the quarterback position. Dillon Gabriel turned into pretty prolific seasons at UCF, 32 TDs, 4 picks, 29 TDs, 7 picks. The other year, only the 3 games played in 2021. Lefty quarterback. The last time Oklahoma had a lefty, of course, it worked out pretty well. Your thoughts about Dillon Gabriel? And just saw an article by Pro Football Focus that had Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams listed as 2 of the 3 top quarterbacks in the country. Gabriel at 8. Just your thoughts about where the position has changed with his entry into the program.
Yeah, well, when you said the last time Oklahoma had a lefty quarterback, you were talking about Kendall Thompson, right?
I was not talking about Kendall Thompson. I do remember Kendall Thompson. No,
I
was going back to 2000 on that one.
Yeah, that was an interesting little cameo in the Kendall Thompson days. But no, you're right. The last time Oklahoma had a southpaw getting any significant playing time at quarterback, it was Josh Heupel, and that was naturally the last time that Oklahoma won the national championship. But look, here's the thing about it is Oklahoma's going to be watching 2 of their former signal callers, as you mentioned, light it up at the collegiate level this year at different institutions. Caleb Williams is going to have a tremendous year at USC. There's no getting around that. And likewise, Spencer Rattler and Shane Beamer's offense at South Carolina is a guy that's going to have a lot of success as well. It's not really a surprise to me that those guys are projected to be 2 of, I would say, top 5, top 10 most productive quarterbacks in the country. And I would figure that both of their programs have winning seasons, approach double-digit wins, go to bowl games. And so I'm interested to see what the response from the Oklahoma fan base will be thereafter, because Spencer Rattler was a guy that drew the ire of the fan base to a certain extent at a certain point in time. And you heard the calls for Caleb Williams. But then when Lincoln Riley left and Caleb Williams followed him, that brought a whole new wave of Caleb dissenters as well. So that'll be an interesting dynamic. I'm curious to see how that plays out. But as for Dillon Gabriel, no, this is a guy that's very quietly been one of the more productive quarterbacks in the nation over the past 3 seasons. And you mentioned that he only ended up playing 3 games in 2021 due to injury. But then you forget, he won the starting job at UCF, where Levy was the offensive coordinator in 2019, as a true freshman. And over the course of his career, he's got over 7,000 passing yards, 70 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. He's been clinically efficient, and in a system where he's going to have better skill position talent around him than ever before. He's a guy that you really feel confident in leading this Oklahoma offense. It's not as if they've cast an unknown commodity into the limelight as the starting quarterback at the University of Oklahoma. No, Dillon Gabriel is a guy that's been there, done that. He's been one of the more productive quarterbacks in the country, and now he gets to step into a situation where he's got more of a chance than ever before, not only to put up those big numbers that we're accustomed to seeing from Dillon Gabriel, but to lead a team to double-digit wins, perhaps a conference championship. And I don't think it's out of the question, Mark, that Oklahoma could make a sleeper run for a college football playoff berth if everything falls their way in 2022. That schedule is very, very easy. And the dates with Baylor and Oklahoma State are not going to be a gimme. Granted, that game against Texas in the Cotton Bowl can swing either way in any given year. That's one of those where you throw records and optics out the window. But if Oklahoma takes care of business, and if their defense is everything it's cracked up to be in Brent Venables' first year at the helm, this is a team that can go places. But make no mistake, they're going to go as far as Dillon Gabriel carries them, because if there is one player that this team's success is riding on, it's Dillon Gabriel. If he goes down, or if he struggles, then what are you left with at the quarterback position? Well, you have a true freshman in Nick Evers waiting in the wings, and you have a walk-on in Ralph Rucker, who saw a little bit of playing time last year, but that most Sooner fans would not be inspired if he saw the field, quite honestly. And so, to me, the success of this team rides more than anything else. And I know it's kind of cliche to say, they're going to go as far as the quarterback goes, but I think that's really the case with this Oklahoma offense. They will go as far as Dillon Gabriel takes them. So if he is as productive in Jeff Lebby's offense as he was as a true freshman in 2019, and if he can catalyze this offensive attack that had its struggles in 2021, and particularly some of those elite guys at the wide receiver position and the running back position, they saw their growth, their development, their production stunted in 2021 in Lincoln Riley's offense. If Levy and Gabriel can help unlock the potential that those guys like Marvin Mims and Eric Gray have demonstrated over the past couple of years, Oklahoma is going to be in a really good position to make a deep run, potentially win the Big 12, and who knows, maybe hit the back door and claim a college football playoff berth in 2022.
And you've got to think that while Dillon Gabriel is going to face better defense week to week, it's not like he's going to face defensive talent that he didn't face on occasion at UCF, because they would schedule tough out of conference games. So I don't think that that's a decided jump that he's going to have to make. But again, consistently week to week, he's going to face better defenses in the Big 12. There might be a chuckle or two out there when I state that, but again, catch up with college football 2022. This is not the Big 12 of 2017 and 18. Got Parker Thune on the line from 247 Sports, OU Insider. Catch him right there. Excellent work on Oklahoma football and recruiting in particular. Looking at the running back position, of course, Kennedy Brooks and his 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns out the door. Eric Gray, the Tennessee transfer, comes back, as well as Marcus Major, a guy that Oklahoma fans have been wanting to see more of, who's been around the program for 3 years now.
Yeah, so the running back picture at OU is interesting, because I think the easy thing to say is Eric Gray is going to be the starter, and you're going to see Marcus Major in a change of pace role, because to the casual observer, to the naked eye, that's what it looks like it's going to be for Oklahoma in 2022. Gray put up 1,000 scrimmage yards as a sophomore at Tennessee in 2020, came to Oklahoma with a lot of hype, and naturally kind of took a backseat to Kennedy Brooks, who was one of the most outstanding and most productive running backs in program history in 2021. But Gray is a guy that, much like Gabriel, he's been there, done that elsewhere. Now what can he do at a place like Oklahoma, where he's got better blockers than he's ever had before, and he's got better talent around him at the skill positions than he's ever had before? So Eric Gray is a guy where I'm intrigued to see what his ceiling is in this offense if he's heavily utilized. And Marcus Major is entering his 5th season with the Sooners. He's one of those guys that I think everybody's just waiting on to break out. You know, you've heard the hype for Marcus Major. It seems like every single offseason since he was a redshirt freshman. Hey, this is a guy to watch. He might end up getting a pretty significant chunk of the carries this season. There was a time, Mark, where Marcus Major was being touted as the next Adrian Peterson. And I think that's an unfair comparison for any running back, because there is and will ever be only one AD. But I'm actually convinced that the guy that might end up getting the lion's share of the touches in the backfield for Oklahoma is neither Eric Gray nor Marcus Major. And Oklahoma has a guy coming in as an incoming freshman, currently with the team right now as an early enrollee, that I absolutely love, and that in my eyes was easily one of the top 3 running backs in the 2022 recruiting cycle. That's Javonte Barnes out of Desert Pines High School in Las Vegas, Nevada. Barnes was a guy that had a lot of interest in USC, had a lot of interest in Alabama, had some interest in Florida State. But the ties with DeMarco Murray, obviously being a fellow Vegas native, really put Oklahoma in an outstanding spot to secure his commitment. It kind of dragged out a little bit into the month of January. He committed at the Under Armour All-American game. But that was a phenomenal late addition to this recruiting class for Oklahoma, because Barnes is one of the most dynamic runners that you will see on tape as you look at his high school film, and particularly when you look at his peers in the 2022 cycle. I'm not convinced that pound for pound there was a better running back in the nation in that recruiting class than Javonte Barnes. And early returns on him throughout winter workouts have been outstanding. You think back to what Trey Sermon did as a true freshman for Oklahoma in 2017. I think Barnes is a guy that can have that type of impact. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he immediately supplants Eric Gray and Marcus Major to be the week 1 starter at Oklahoma at running back. But what I do think is there's going to come a point in time at which it's going to be very, very difficult to keep Javonte Barnes off the field. I go back to Marvin Mims in 2020, for instance, when he came in as a true freshman, and in a loaded wide receiver room at Oklahoma, nobody really paid much attention to this 4-star true freshman out of Frisco. But lo and behold, he comes out, catches 3 touchdown passes over the season's first 2 games, and you see his snap count gradually start to increase. And by the end of the season, he's commandeered 70 to 80% of the snaps, and he's making big plays in the Big 12 championship and the bowl game for Oklahoma. I think Javonte Barnes can be that type of guy in 2022. He can be what Marvin Mims was in 2020. He can be what Trey Sermon was in 2017. I would expect that ultimately Barnes ends up with 500, 600 rushing yards at the very least and is good for a handful of touchdowns. I think his ceiling is much, much higher than that. If he proves that he is on a different physical level and he's clearly more capable of shouldering the load in the backfield than Eric Ray and Marcus Major, and I understand it's a big hill to climb to get there, but I do think that if he ends up getting the lion's share of the carries, if he's getting 70 to 80% of the workload, his ceiling could be north of 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. So that's one guy I'm really looking for to make a splash in 2022 as a true freshman. And it's not often that I would tout a true freshman as somebody who's going to have an immediate impact, but I think Javonte Barnes is that kind of player.
Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk come into the program as 2 4-stars with top-end speed. They're both roughly top 100 players in the nation, according to 247 Sports, both top 10 running backs. So I've got to ask the question, Parker, why you side with Barnes, where Sawchuk, according to the 247 rankings, is slightly better, at least at this point, coming into college.
Yeah, sure. Well, 2 reasons here. One, Barnes is enrolling early. Gavin Sawchuk is not. And I don't know if people understand how much it benefits a player to have an extra semester on campus before his first season hits. When you join the team in January, as opposed to joining the team in June, you get to go through winter workouts. You get to go through spring practices. You get to start learning the offense and getting to know your peers and building relationships that can generate big returns on the football field. And so Javonte Barnes has a natural leg up over Gavin Sawchuk in that capacity, just by virtue of the fact that he's on campus right now and Gavin Sawchuk isn't. I also think Barnes is more physically ready for the collegiate game than Sawchuk. If you look at their frames, Barnes is a guy where he stands about 6'1", 190, but he's built. He's muscular. You stand next to him, which I have on the field at Gaylord Family Oklahoma Memorial Stadium. I got the chance to catch up with him briefly when he was on an unofficial visit it might have been his official visit in the 2021 season. Regardless, he's a guy where you walk up to him, he seems a lot bigger in person than he does when you look at pictures. That's a guy that's ready to play Power 5 football from a physical standpoint. Gavin Sawchuk is a guy that's a little bit more slightly built, and I would say probably needs a year in the weight room before he's ready to be a 2-3 down type of guy at the collegiate level. Not to say he can't contribute right away, but I think Barnes' body type and his physique, as well as the physical tools that he brings to the table, are more conducive to having that immediate impact.
Makes total sense. The early enrollee status. That's something 247 Sports, when it comes to lists and information, better than anybody in the business. No question about that. That is my go-to 247 Sports, transfer portal, early enrollee status, those sorts of things. But I'm not seeing the distinction in the early enrollee status when I see the commits list for 2022. Makes total sense right there. Parker Thune's on the line with us talking Oklahoma football. We're breaking down the offense as we head towards spring. You can catch Parker on OU Insider, 247 Sports, 947 The Ref, and, of course, Sports Talk 1400. Moving on to the wide receivers, Marvin Mims back in the fold, 32 catches, 5 touchdowns. Jaden Hazelwood, much was expected of him. He's now gone to Arkansas after 39 catches and 6 touchdowns. Mario Williams makes his departure as expected to USC. So a lot of talent lost at the wideout position.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out in 2022, because there are a lot of people following this program that would say depth is a concern at wide receiver. And as I look at the wide receiver room at this point in time, my response to that is, okay, how? How do you look at that wide receiver room and conclude that depth is a concern? Because right now you have 9 scholarship wide receivers. You have several guys that have been key cogs in this offense in years past. You're looking at Marvin Mims. You're getting Theo Weiss back. Drake Stoops has been as stable and consistent as anybody in that Oklahoma offense over the past 2 seasons. And not only that, but beyond your 9 scholarship guys, you've got a couple of very highly regarded preferred walk-ons in Gavin Freeman and Davion Woolen, guys that said no to Power 5 scholarship offers or FBS scholarship offers in order to walk on at Oklahoma. So those are guys that can play a little bit of ball themselves. Moreover, your 4-star tight end signee in the 2022 cycle, Caden Helms, at this point is more of a wide receiver than he is a tight end. And that's also a guy that, based on what I've heard he's doing in winter workouts, that's a guy that could see some snaps right off the bat as a true freshman as well. But regardless, you have 12 guys right there in that mix that I think are more than capable of stepping onto the field and playing wide receiver at Oklahoma in 2022. But especially when you look at the top end of that roster, Marvin Mims has the opportunity and has the talent to be one of the most productive and one of the most dynamic weapons in all of college football in the passing game. He was massively underutilized last season at Oklahoma. Moreover, Theo Weiss, if you'll recall, led the team or tied for the team lead in receptions going back to 2020 when he was a sophomore. Missed the 2021 season with that foot injury, but you get him back in the fold. That's huge. And then, of course, Drake Stoops, a guy that just gets the job done. By hook or by crook, he always finds a way to get open, and anything that you throw at him, he's going to catch. Now, beyond those three, and those three are the guys that I think you'll see starting at wide receiver, at least initially. Beyond those guys, you've got Trayvon West, who made some nice plays in sporadic playing time in both 2020 and 2021. You got Brian Darby, who made a statement down the stretch with a touchdown catch against Texas Tech and a touchdown catch against Oklahoma State. You got Cody Jackson, a guy a lot of people forget about because an injury, well, I guess I shouldn't call it an injury, a medical issue cost him the latter 2/3 of the 2021 season as a true freshman. But he was a guy that was seeing the field quite a bit early on and making some nice plays at the wide receiver position. So that's a guy that I would have my eye on, as well as somebody that can be a rotational contributor. Got a couple of really nice, really physically imposing true freshmen in Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson coming on. Anderson 6'4", Gibson 6'5". So there's talent aplenty in this wide receiver room. I think for my money, you've got to make an effort to get Mims the ball as much as possible. If you look at the way that Lincoln Riley used wide receivers in 2021, I was talking to my coworker, Brandon Drum, about this last night on our podcast over at OUinsider.com. It is possible to witness your wide receiver room undergo death by 1,000 cuts. And that's really what Lincoln Riley did to his receivers in 2021, because as much as they were rotating out, as much as they were subbing, and as much as they were distributing the ball all across the board, you ended up with a lot of dissatisfied guys that felt like they should have gotten the ball more. And you had Marvin Mims, and it's easy to say, sure, Marvin Mims should have gotten the ball more. Jaden Hazelwood should have gotten the ball more. Mike Woods, Mario Williams should have gotten the ball more. The harsh reality, Mark, is you can't make more targets for every single one of those guys. You got to decide who's going to make the biggest impact on a week-to-week basis, on a play-to-play basis for your football team, and you got to make it a priority to get them the ball. For my money, Marvin Mims was and is the most talented wide receiver on this Oklahoma roster. And there is a reason why he was strongly considering entering the transfer portal after the 2021 season. And it's because there would be games where he had the ball thrown his way 2 or 3 times, and he'd only be in the game for 40, 50% of the snaps. That's a travesty when you have a guy that not only is as talented as Marvin Mims has proven to be, but had a freshman season in 2020 that was remarkable by any definition, and that presumably was a stepping stone to a much greater role in the offense. So Mims has to be the guy that is your wide receiver one in 2022. You can't let him get lost in the shuffle the way that Lincoln Riley did. And I do think if you look at Jeff Levy's offenses historically, they have been tremendously conducive to the production of the lead wide receiver. And to me, that's Marvin Mims. I think you got a couple of really key third down targets in Drake Stoops and Theo Weiss. And then a guy I haven't even mentioned yet, Jalil Farouk, who came on very strong in the Alamo Bowl win. Best friends with Caleb Williams going back to childhood. So it says something about Jalil Farouk that he stayed and stuck it out at Oklahoma, even when his childhood best buddy went to USC. But a lot of people are excited to see what kind of dynamic Farouk can bring to this passing game and how much of an asset he'll ultimately be. But they've got weapons at wide receiver. At Oklahoma, you never really worry about the wide receiver room. Even when there's a lot of unknown, generally there's a guy that emerges. Think back to D.D. Westbrook's outstanding Biletnikoff award-winning season in 2016. Nobody went into that season figuring he'd win the Biletnikoff award, but all of a sudden, week to week, that was a guy that was going for 150 yards on 10 catches and a couple of scores every single game. And so I'm not saying any one guy has that much of an impact for Oklahoma in 2022, but what I am saying is you will see elite numbers from a guy like Marvin Mims, and you will see Theo Weiss made a critical part of the game plan. And you'll see guys like Jalil Farouk and Cody Jackson rotating in and stretching the field. But what you're not going to see is 5 or 6 wideouts that each have 30 catches, 400 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Sure, there's something to be said for spreading the wealth and distributing it all equally. But like I said, if that's the approach you take, you end up with some wideouts that are really, really frustrated with their usage or lack thereof.
Absolutely. We got Parker Thune here talking up Oklahoma football as we head towards spring ball. Catch him on 947 The Ref, 1400 Sports Talk 1400, OU Insider on 247 Sports. As a connection to wide receiver, of course, the tight end position has a pretty major hole left by Austin Stogner's departure to South Carolina, and Jeremiah Hall leaving as well, taking his 32 catches with him.
Yeah, so as I look at the H-back room, I mentioned Caden Helms in our conversation about the wide receivers. And Caden Helms coming in as a true freshman out of Bellevue West High School in Bellevue, Nebraska, is a guy that I really believe is going to push Braden Willis, who is the lone scholarship incumbent at the H-back position. Also, I think we're going to do away with the H-back designation. I think they're just going to be called tight ends going forward. So I tend to favor that just because I thought H-back, like nobody else in the country really uses H-back as the positional term except for Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley. So I think they will be designated on the roster as tight ends. That's the impression I get. So when we're looking at the tight ends, Braden Willis is naturally the guy that comes back in position to assume the starting role in a full-time capacity. And he drew some starts over the course of the last couple seasons in a constant rotation with Jeremiah Hall and Austin Stogner. But coming back as a senior, 5th-year guy, he had the option to go to the NFL, had a pretty decent draft grade. He chose to run it back for one more season and take part in Jeff Levy's offense and see what it could do for his draft stock. So he is the guy that you look at as probably the safest bet to start. Now, they're bringing in a transfer from the University of Missouri in Daniel Parker that's very much a blocking first guy. I want to say he only has 12 catches over 4 seasons at Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to fact check myself on that. But the point is, Daniel Parker's not a guy that's going to factor into the pass catching picture a whole heck of a lot. What the Sooners do have is they have a pair of very talented freshmen in Helms and Jason Llewellyn, a 3-star signee out of Aledo, Texas. I tend to believe at this point in time, Mark, that you're going to see Helms push Willis for his starting role. And here's what I will say about that situation. The mental aspect of the game matters a lot in that whole discussion as well, too, because I don't think anybody on the inside of that building, anybody that gets a look at the team on a day-to-day basis would deny that Caden Helms' physical ceiling is a lot higher than Braden Willis's. Caden Helms is a guy that has blown people away in winter workouts thus far with what he's been able to do, his speed, his agility, and especially his speed and agility at his size, 6'5", 235. And so I would anticipate that he will push Willis, and I think we'll get some rotational action to start off the 2022 campaign. And again, I look at him much in the same light as I look at Javonte Barnes. If he proves that he's too good to take off the field, then he's going to see his usage continually increase and continue to increase. Now, with Willis, you have a guy that has been he's been a piece. I don't know if he's been a key piece, but he's been a piece for this offense dating back to 2019. His emergence really came in that memorable comeback victory against Baylor in Waco, where he scored the first touchdown of his career that tied that game 31-31 in the late stages of the 4th quarter. Ever since then, his production's kind of been capped almost. His ceiling has been capped by the presence of Stogner and Jeremiah Hall. Now he has the leg up in that he's the lone returner in this room. And so I would expect that at least initially Willis is going to be the guy that's getting the lion's share of the action at the tight end position. I don't know how heavily Jeff Levy will rely on the tight end. That kind of remains to be seen. But what I do believe you're going to see is a lot of Willis to start, and you'll start to see Helms rotating in. And again, I think what he brings to the table in terms of his physical tools, Helms is a guy that might be too good by the end of the 2022 season to keep off the field. So you could see him starting to get more and more targets, more and more touches, more and more snaps as the season progresses.
Willis caught 15 in 2021, a couple touchdowns. Daniel Parker, for the record, those 12 catches came in 2021. So 12 receptions, 3 touchdowns last season, 41 catches for his career with 4 touchdowns at Mizzou. Got Parker Thune on the line, OU Insider, 247 Sports, tracking right there, as well as 947 The Ref and Sports Talk 1400, his daily show there at noon Central Time. Parker, offensive line, I'm looking at 3 guys that had an impact in regards to significant playing time out the door, led by Marquise Hayes. A couple Power 5 transfers come in, as well as a couple 4-stars.
Yeah, so offensive line, I'm actually not convinced there's going to be a whole lot of turnover there. I think you're going to see much the same offensive line that you saw in 2021. Obviously, you have to replace, though, Marquise Hayes, the left guard, who's since departed for the NFL, and Tyrese Robinson, the guard turned right tackle, who's also heading for greener professional pastures. Now, the Sooners brought in McCade Mathier, the 3-year starter from out of Cal at the guard position, via the transfer portal. And I would imagine he is an immediate plug-and-play replacement for Marquise Hayes at left guard. I think you can safely pencil McCade Mathier into that starting role, because that's not a guy that you bring in as a depth piece, right? He started from the get-go as a true freshman. He's only played 1 game in his entire collegiate career that he didn't start in. And so that's a guy that was an immediate impact performer out there for the Golden Bears. And he comes to Oklahoma with much the same expectation on his shoulders that he's going to replace Marquise Hayes and be Oklahoma's starting left guard for the next 2 seasons. Now, when you look at right tackle, I think the easy thing to say is that Juanier Morris is going to be the one to replace Tyrese Robinson. And many will forget, Juanier Morris was actually a preseason all Big 12 selection last year. He came from Oklahoma via the portal after 2 seasons at Tennessee. Like Mathier, he had been a starter from the get-go as a true freshman with the Volunteers. He was a former 5-star recruit in the class of 2019, and then didn't start a game for Oklahoma the entirety of the 2021 season. There were a lot of reasons for that. He wasn't in prime physical shape when he showed up to campus. And to be quite honest, Tyrese Robinson went and won that job. Anton Harrison won the job at left tackle. Juanier Morris just got flat beat out. Now, as you look to 2022, Morris is the guy that's the most experienced. And he saw some action for Oklahoma in 2021 in relief of Robinson. I believe it was the Texas game, where Robinson had to miss some time due to an injury, and you saw Morris get some substantial snaps there. But when you look at his past at Tennessee and the fact that he's had to go up against SEC defensive linemen before and has held his own, you kind of start to get the impression that 2021 was a blip on the radar, and that it's a matter of when, not if, he really comes into his own as an offensive lineman. And this is a guy that's, he's been touted as a potential future NFL first rounder ever since he was in high school. So the potential is there. It's just a matter of unlocking it. And so to me, I think Juanier Morris moves into that role at right tackle in 2022, and your starting offensive line consists of Anton Harrison at left tackle, McCade Mathier at left guard, Andrew Rame at center, Chris Murray reprises his role as right guard, and then you have Juanier Morris at right tackle. That's what it looks like to me. Guys that I'm interested to see whether they can make a push for playing time include true freshman Jake Taylor out of Las Vegas, Nevada, Bishop Gorman High School, the same high school that produced DeMarco Murray. He's a top 150 guy in the 24/7 Sports composite in the class of 2022. And that is a guy that will step on campus and immediately be ready to compete at the Power 5 level. Again, I don't know that he starts. I don't know that he plays in any substantial capacity as a true freshman, but that's a guy that down the line, as soon as 2023, you can expect to be in the starting lineup. And I'm curious to see whether he pushes his elders in that offensive line room and at least makes his way onto the 2 deep as a true freshman. Jacob Sexton, the local kid out of Edmond Deer Creek High School, another 4-star addition in the 2022 cycle. Sexton's a guy that I would say probably needs a year. He's one of those guys that he's certainly strong enough. He's certainly physical enough, but I think as of last check, he was tipping the scales at about 285 pounds, I believe. So I think he needs to add a little bit of weight and just adjust to the speed of the collegiate game before he's ready to factor into the picture for Oklahoma. But much like Taylor, Sexton is a guy that I look at long-term as a guy that's going to be an impact performer on that offensive line for Oklahoma. But regarding the 2022 season, I think what you're going to see is that lineup that I mentioned: Harrison, Mattier, Rame, Murray, and Morris, because all of those guys have experience. All of them have proven that they're capable of getting in the trenches against Power 5 opponents and holding their own. And that, I think, is the lineup that Bill Bedenbaugh is probably going to feel most confident in initially. And maybe you see the likes of a Savion Byrd or an Aaron Parks or a Marcus Alexander or even a Bray Walker, for instance, make a push and supplant one of those 5 guys to be a starter at offensive lineman. I don't see it. To me, it's pretty clear what the picture is going to be. Robert Conjal is another guy that saw some pretty significant action at center in 2021 in a rotational role with Andrew Rame. So maybe there's a battle to be had there. That's where my money is, though, on how the Sooners line up in the trenches come 2022. Harrison, Mattier, Rame, Chris Murray, Juanier Morris.
Love the offensive line breakdown, and especially for those of us who don't track OU football on a daily basis, but keep up with the major personnel shifts across the country. Yes, Juanier Morris is a former 5-star and a guy that played substantial time at Tennessee. Most of us were thinking, why is this guy not on the field? He's not hurt. He was supposed to be an impact player there in 2021. Parker Thune, 247 Sports. That's OU Insider. Also his daily show, noon Central Time on Sports Talk 1400 and also 947 The Ref. Parker, we appreciate the breakdown. You did yeoman's work here, breaking down the entire offense for us. Would have loved back to check out the D.
Yeah, no problem. We'll make it happen, Mark.